Good morning, everybody. I'm Shaian Gosai, and this is Stephen Van Wassenhova, and we're going to be talking about balancing flexibility and structure for playbooks and, in general, for your Demisto deployments. Just really quickly, as a show of hands, how many people have the pleasure of using Demisto currently and are, creating playbooks? Okay, cool. And how about multi-tenant systems? Do you guys use that or standalone? Okay. Cool, so a few. Yeah, multi-tenant's not as popular, obviously, as standalone. A few people have use cases for it. Everything we're going to talk about, all of the takeaways, apply for multi-tenant as well as standalone. So, all right, so we're going to talk about a brief introduction to our company, some problem statement. So we have extraordinary growth. We've run into some challenges, and how we're going to talk about how Demisto has helped us overcome those challenges. We're going to talk about the global router paradigm that's our solution, and if we have time, we'll wrap up with some other cool things that we're doing with Demisto. So DeepWatch, we're a managed security solutions provider. We partner with our customers. We're basically an extension of their security operations center. We use complementing technologies like threat intelligence, machine learning, SOAR, Demisto, to provide value, and it's kind of fueled our growth. So we have champagne problems, right? 99 problems, DBot's probably not one of them, and we're growing pretty fast. We ingest a lot of data. We're increasingly have more incidents being created, more playbooks, and so with that, how do we still provide our customers with that service that they're used to and still scale out to 200 plus customers and have a little bit of overhead? So obviously we have to transform our culture, right? So we're gonna automate. We want to have everyone from our sales to our engineers and analysts thinking about how they're automating their workloads and thinking about solving things at scale. And obviously Demisto is central to everything we do. So this is kind of a typical customer deployment. We just want to show you this and how Demisto fits into one of our customer environments, for example. So data comes in from the customer's data center. It flows into a virtual or cloud SIM data center that we set up. Correlation rules trigger, creates incidents in Demisto, playbooks run, and analysts potentially would see the incident and they would do analysis. Some of it's manual, some of it's automated. And if it's a true positive, there's ticketing systems, PagerDuty, Slack, notification systems that we alert our customers. And then obviously we do contextualization and other REST API calls out to different integrations as well in our playbooks. Imagine this setup and multiply it by 200. So that's really the situation that we are trying to overcome, is how do we scale? How do we do this? We have 200 different SIM data centers, one for each one of our customers. We essentially have 200 Demisto systems, and we need to do that and still do the customization that our customers want, as well as push global content. So, problem statement. Multi-tenant systems, we can deploy playbooks at the master level, right? So we push a playbook at the master level. All of our customers get it, but the problem there is we can't edit that playbook and change it for our customers. If we wanted to do that, we would have to copy that playbook, edit the name, change it, have a local copy of it, and when we have a local copy of it, then we can start making changes. But imagine you're doing that for 200 customers, right? You're gonna end up with messy, uncontrolled local playbooks. It's gonna be error-prone and difficult to maintain. And when you have a limited staff, it's difficult to kind of control that as well. The other thing that becomes a challenge is user experience, right? So imagine you have 200 playbooks that are slightly different or maybe drastically different. Your analysts are looking at this and trying to decipher what these playbooks are doing. It takes time. So if we had a structure that our playbooks follow, it would be kind of a consistent user experience for people that are using Demisto. So just to drive home the point, imagine you had a master that had 30 incident types and 30 different playbooks, and then you had 100 tenants, and each one of those tenants had unique incident types, 30 and 30 playbooks associated with those, right? So you're going to end up with, over 3,000 assets, that you would have to deal with, and clearly this is not a scalable solution. So this is only talking about playbooks and incident types, right? We haven't even touched on layouts, custom integrations, system administration of Demisto. So there's a lot more that you have to take into consideration as well. Okay, so what are our options? So really, we're kind of have a Goldilocks problem here, right? So on one side, we could maintain the status quo, and we could have local Demisto deployments, and we could have custom content for all of our customers, but we would have to hire more people, right? We'd need 20 other people potentially that are Demisto experts that are building and deploying and administering Demisto for each one of our customers. On the other hand, we could have a more rigid structure where we just deploy things from the master. At that point, we won't have as much custom content, but we would be able to control it if it was just Steve and I.
And that's really the crux of the issue is, do you provide everything to everybody in one package, or do you provide something to an individual in their customized package? And how do you play that line? And trying to solve for that problem is really the core of this presentation, to talk about how do you solve that Goldilocks issue, and how do you make it scalable, and how do you provide a framework for both your Demisto developers, your security analysts, and your threat hunters to work in. So we're going to go with the middle option because we clearly can't just staff up as many people as we need. If you are a Demisto expert, please talk to me afterwards. I would love to pick your brain and see where we can go with that. The opposite side is we don't give custom content to people, and that's just an unacceptable situation. So that middle ground is what we're trying to solve. So we sat down and we sort of talked about what would be our perfect scenario, what would be the features that we would want within a framework that we could implement without going to Demisto and asking them, please, will you change this core thing, or please, will you solve this problem for us? That's not really the right way to solve that issue. You don't ask the bears to serve something other than porridge. You have to figure out how to eat that bowl. And so we came up with a couple of things. So for our perfect list, what if we set out what an incident type was, and that's not tied to what a customer's incident type is? Customer A may use Varus, customer B may use MITRE, customer C may use something else, but at the end of the day, we have to have an understanding of what all of those equate to. And what if every single incident type, no matter what, always had a default playbook? We're always prepared to have something run whenever there is an incident or an event that bubbles up to the attention that it requires. That would be great. And in that scenario, if there was nothing that we had pre-planned for that incident type, then we should have a default route that should always exist in case a 0 day is released and we're not prepared for a playbook. We don't want to have analysis paralysis. We want to get out there and put that thing in production so that we're covering that base.
Right. And
that's sort of the framework of the beginning of it.
Sure, and then there's the shared services component, right?
Yeah, so obviously that's just the introduction into it, but the data that you get into that may not be exactly what you need within the playbook. It may not be enriched in the playbook, and it may not meet the circumstances to execute other actions within that playbook. So every action within Demisto should have a core set of shared services that clean the data, that format things, that provide that contextualization, and provide other metadata that we can use within the playbook to switch and to look up and to call different functions. If that doesn't exist, then we're kind of back to that Goldilocks problem of too big or too small. Additionally, we would like to implement a framework a fingerprint that touches and leaves a residual signature on that incident to say that this was a clean incident, that we have all the data that we need to move forward with response, that we have detected what we're looking for. Customers also have a requirement to do that as well. They want to know that the thing that they actually care about is also implemented. So we have 2 fingerprints that we have to implement. All of this sort of reinforces the master tenant, multi-tenancy components of Demisto, and so we're sort of, getting into that same reinforcement aspect that we'd like to continue. Additionally, that shared services should also provide a base answer for all the 5 Ys or 5 Ws that we could think of. Who did this, why, when, where? If that's not answered within an incident, then that's additional time that someone manually has to look that up, and we're failing at our jobs to reduce that overloaded security analyst. So with our dream team, if this was the things that we needed, what does that actually look like? And so we came up with a generalized flow of what that would look like. So this is the router system that we've implemented in Demisto. And granted, this is the simplest example. This is not really a realistic production playbook. This is meant to illustrate the point home. So don't think that this is something that is going to solve all of your problems. This is a framework for you to work with. There's two important things to highlight here is the color distinctions. Apologize for those with green imbalances in the eyes, but dark green is the global scope. This is what you would think of as content that's pushed from the master. And things in light green are local scope, so only to that specific customer or tenant. The system does inspection on incident metadata to determine what it should be doing. So at the very top, when something comes in, the very first thing you should do is look at that data and either clean it, add to it, or imprint something that will be used later within that playbook, and that's essentially the beginning of the shared services. Once we make it to that shared services, we then have all the data that we need to do that inspection and ask, what should we do with this next? Do we have an out-of-the-box answer for this? Are we prepared for what is going to happen? Or is there a customer answer for this? That we've gotten requirements, we've done an entire analysis flow, and we have a swim lane diagram of what they want specifically for that. If that's the case, then that is our immediate split between the two colors. One for a master answer and one for a local answer. This is really important because most customers don't necessarily have a solid or a static answer for something. They may have a change in scope, they may have a change in technology, and being flexible to accommodate that is really, really important. Additionally, these are swapped out on the fly. So it's a piece of content that is local to that tenant that only exists for that tenant. Doesn't exist anywhere else, it's only for them. This makes it very easy for us as well because we don't actually even have to know what that is. It just automatically is swapped out, and Demisto takes care of that for us in the back end. It's one of the greatest features about this platform is it is so flexible. After we've gotten to which router we want to do, and we've done our shared services, and we've gone through the imprint of data, we can then call what that specific use case is. That specific use case, for those that are developing playbooks or who are interested in getting into that, playbooks themselves the foundation of compartmentalization is embodied with sub-playbooks within a playbook. It's basically peeling back an onion and being able to have those layers for it. So we've got a clear answer on what our global cases are, and you have a clear answer on what you want your local cases to be. We can support both of those right out of the gate and allow you that flexibility. Once your local playbook runs or the global playbook runs, there's got to be some action afterwards. You know, you've gone out and we've remediated things and we've looked things up and we've turned off ports and whatnot. But after that, there's got to be some human intervention to ask with what is the next step. Sometimes there's a shortcut and that's not included. But for the majority of the time, there really does need to be a sign-off on some of that. So all that flows back into the one last route within this, and that is basically the escalation tree. Who can touch it? Let's make sure that they have the opportunity to physically interact with this and lend their insight into it, and then have a shared escalation tree. Because anybody here that wants to raise their hand who wants to get woken up at 4 in the morning for the one playbook that you forgot to update for escalation to pager duty that doesn't include your home phone number, I want you on my team because I'm really glad you woke up at 4 in the morning. So basically, this is the entire crux of the system. Have a logic within a router that is tied to an incident type at the high level that you can flexibly manipulate at the low level. So what does that actually get us? It gets us, like I said, that shared set of default playbook and incident type mappings. And for those that haven't really gotten into the multi-tenancy power of Demisto or into the ability of creating very flexible playbooks, the linkage between incident type and playbook can seem alluring, but that is a false sense of security to say that I'm going to create an incident type for everything. Because every single security event, every single virus, every single malware or phishing campaign, you then have to create a new asset for it. And that asset has a playbook, and that playbook has dependencies, and you are going down the spiral of having many different things to manage. So having a framework like this allows us to minimize that, but allows the expansion after the fact of that being run.
Right, we basically have a playbook for all possible options.
Absolutely. Never be unprepared, always be prepared. Yep. Those are the two sides that we want to be. In addition, every option within the playbook, if it fails, will reroute back to a default playbook. So if I have a security analyst or a threat hunter that has tied some event in a SIM or in EWS to call a playbook that doesn't exist and that fails, I shouldn't stop on that. I shouldn't wait for someone to go in and manually click a continue or to have to solve for that small edge case. I should always have an option to go to a default playbook. That's a very big win. It reduces your error rates from into the teens down to sub 1%. And for your analysts that are already overworked, they don't want to have to deal with a problem within a playbook. They just want it to work. Additionally, the shared services that I talked about, that is super important because one customer, one technology is not really a thing. Many different technologies, and they get swapped out whenever the business sees fit. So have a shared services that can accommodate for that. It's a huge win. The swapping of sub-playbooks automatically without having to find them, that is probably one of the biggest things that hopefully the support team or the sales engineer has talked to you about in Demiso, the ability to swap that out. It is super important. It gives us the ability to have hyper custom content. It's not just a stock answer. It's not just my guess at an answer. It is, I've gone through the nitty gritty and down to the lowest level to understand what that is.
Right.
Those are some of our benefits.
Right. One other thing, or the last thing, was the context normalization. So
right.
Really, if you're processing these incidents the same, you're able to provide metrics the same across all incidents. So that's important using the global router playbook structure.
I would be remiss to say that there are not any considerations. There definitely are. Implementing a system like this is not easy, especially if you are not doing it from the beginning. We're here to share our journey with you guys and the experience that we've gone through with creating these and the stumbles that we've had along the way. One of those stumbles is folding legacy content back into this. For the majority of the cases, it works out perfect. We need to have this. This is the reason we did it in the first place. But there are some cases where I don't really need to have a triage flow. I don't really need to have a shared services. As soon as this happens, I need to have a page. I need to have an email. I need to contact another system, or I need to turn off a port. There's got to be an out for that. Providing a framework gives you that ability. That's more work. With that work, great power comes great responsibility. Your QA team, your developers are going to need to know where that's at. And if they're not, then you're not really doing full QA on this. If you roll out a playbook that has this paradigm, you have many different opportunities to break the entire system if you aren't careful. You have to know what the scopes are, where they're applied, and how that impacts the playbooks that you have on a master level and on a local level. Additionally, like I said, not all of them are required, so you have to know how to be able to shortcut that when it comes through.
Cool. You want to demo it up a little bit?
So now it's demo time. Thankfully, they cooked us up with an Ethernet connection, so we're a little bit faster. So the demo sort of drives home the point of the Goldilocks issue. How could you solve this in the 3 different ways? So we'll show you the large bowl, the too hot. We'll show you the too cold, and we'll show you the in-between that seems to fit. All right, so this is the example of the too hot. I'm going to create an incident type for every single incident that possibly could be. This is a big amount of time and a big amount of responsibility. We have an incident for the denial of service. We have one for DOS. We have one for employee dismissal. And all of these have a playbook that is required to run with them. That means that there are many different forks that Demisto is doing all at the same time, and your resources may not be ready for this. Additionally, your team has to support this. This is something that's going to be very hard to maintain going forward. It's not the worst, but if you're blowing it up on the scale that we are, then it's very hard to administer. So this is kind of didn't fit right for us. Our second option is to say, okay, if we move fully away from that and we only have a single incident type, what would that playbook look like? It would look huge, because that playbook has to then do the routing for us, the job of the incidents. And you tell me any security analyst that wants to look at this. You tell me any senior level person that wants to be explained what happened in this. If you had a shared services in this, and you made one change that looked at context and you forgot to include a $sign character, you just broke that for everybody. And now you're the one getting paged out at 4 in the morning because it's not working. That is not something that you want to be. This does not work. So this was not our fit either. So our choice was, at the end of having this conversation of what our perfect world would be, was to implement a router system. That means that our framework is the incident type at the master. The incident type at the tenant can be your framework. We can set that within the context of the playbook itself because we have our shared services. This means that every incident type then has to have a playbook. This is important, and including the unclassified types, because you may not control everything your customer does. And as much as you want to say that you can talk to or that you can coach your teams internally, they may not have the foresight to know about this or to have a typo within, is it vulnerability management or is it policy violation? I forgot which one I'm supposed to do, so I'm just going to type policy. Well, policy doesn't exist, and therefore no incident runs. And if no incident runs, then this incident is not being worked at all, and the escalation of things, the sky is falling, just continues to happen. So create your incident types that make sense for your business and connect a router to them. And let that router call specific use cases. Don't try to push that into the incident types because that's not appropriate. Additionally, this gives us the option to have SLAs for all of these. For those that have worked with incident types, there are several different things that it gets you. But if you go one side with a large number of incident types or only one incident type, you don't get that flexibility. That SLA is applied to that incident type. So you lose out on that. Additionally, there's post-processing that goes along with that. And post-processing is only applied for incident types here as well. So you lose out on that functionality. That's not great. Why would I try to make Demisto less powerful? I want to use all the features of it. So have incident types that make sense for you. Tie them to your SLAs and your options and your priorities. And then let the playbook inspect the metadata of the incident from wherever it came and operate on those things.
Okay, cool. Yeah, let's look at a couple incidents here. So say we're pushing global content, right? So we're going to push something, an incident gets created in Demisto, and we'll just run one of the use cases, and this is going to execute the global router playbook. Remember, we have a global router associated with a finite number of incident types at the master level, so it'll always, every incident that comes in for every single customer will run a global router playbook. So in this case, it's running the global router access. If we go look at the work plan, so you can see what's happening here is, the first thing that we're doing in this particular example is data normalization. So this is going to help with the metrics and setting fields. Deduplication is the next thing. And then really the most important thing is the router. So is this a global use case, or is this something custom that we've deployed at the tenant level? So in this case, it was determined that it was a custom use case, a global use case, and then it tries to determine which playbook use case it was. So it was the global use case number 2, so it executed that, and then it eventually went to analyst review. Now, if it couldn't find a playbook that was associated with it, it would route to the default use case. So we always have a fallback plan no matter what. So in this case, then the analyst would take over. They would review the data. It's a data collection task that we're using here. And then from there, they would escalate, and then shared services again when we use escalation to notify the customer. The second path is the custom path. So let's run a custom router use case. So in this case, you'll notice that the playbook took the custom router path. Now notice, when it first executed, it ran a global router use case, right? So it's still associated with the access playbook. So when the incident was created, the first playbook that executed was a global router access playbook, just like the previous one. And then what happened was it detected that it was a custom use case, and we swapped the playbook out. So now it swapped out for the custom router, and it took that path. So if we go look at the work plan,
completely different playbook. Looks very the same. Your analysts will know how to use this. They'll understand what it's telling them. But it's the same template. It's the same repeated pattern that we can do. Shared services, understanding of what use case, execute that use case, and return to your path.
Right, so in the previous example where it split off into the global use case, this one is going to take the other path on the custom side and swap out for the custom router playbook. It's, again, going to do some data normalization specific to that customer now. And then again, a router at the custom level. So the custom use case that our analysts and engineers can develop at the local or the tenant level, so it's decentralized, so we get that flexibility at the local level, and we still, Steve and I are maintaining the structure at the global level. So over here, a global use case executes, and then same thing, analyst review it, and escalation tree.
One really important thing to note is that your deployment and Demisto's deployment can work in tandem together. This is a custom router that has been modified for this customer. It only will ever exist there. You can set that up so you never have data leakage from one customer to another, and some of the advanced features that Demisto is coming out with for deployments will align with this to support that feature. So very useful.
Cool, yeah, so that was kind of what we wanted to show you guys, and we want to really quickly show you a couple other things that we're doing with Demisto, and then after that we can really quickly break for questions.
Demisto, thankfully, is very open about how they work and how the system operates, and gives us the ability to get into that. So for the few people that are working in Playbooks now, for those that are going to be working in it later, the first thing you should read is the API docs, because they are fantastic and they are powerful.
Right, we use the API to basically do everything that you do with the mouse in Demisto. Because we have to manage 200 customers, so it's easier for us to just programmatically do this. The first thing is the Demisto system administration. So since we're monitoring so many different tenants, we basically mine the Demisto logs, and we have like graphs on basically everything. So over here, it's a little hard to see, but literally every Demisto log that gets produced in, var log, Demisto, server.log, we have graphs for. So Dockers that spin up, obviously disk space and the basic stuff, memory utilization, et cetera. And really the other thing that we do is dashboards for our customers. So because we have this global router paradigm deployed, and we're getting consistent, metrics for all of our incident types, using a specific framework, we make a REST API call from our SIM out to Demisto, and we pull back data. So we have static dashboards that we just deploy in our SIM for all Demisto incidents. So essentially over here, you can see in Splunk, it's a little hard to see, but you can see we're running a Python script called Demisto search, and then you're used to the Lucene query language, where we're doing like ID equal to something, and this is really in Splunk making a REST API call out to Demisto, and we're pulling back data. So that's something we do to actually create pretty nice dashboards that are basically real time, that customers can get information about what's going on in Demisto. Obviously, customers have access to their Demisto platform as well. Other things that we've done, for Splunk, we forked the TA. So
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So we forked the TA to make it more useful for us. We have a couple of unique situations that didn't fall within the normal use of the TA. So we want to be able to create indicators from data and not necessarily incidents from that. So if I want to do that, I have to be able to post that information. If I have a trigger already in place, let's just use that. I can automatically pull my information from my SIM, find those actors, and send it as an indicator to Demisto, and have that all in one location. Additionally, we forked the TA to create incidents to have a little bit more flexibility for the Beyond Corp technology, and some additional features within that. We don't have to cover that. We can talk about that afterwards. You can find us. I'd spoken about sort of the ability to have a shared services that cleans your data when it gets into Demisto. There's also a requirement to do that ahead of time. You need to have a linter that's going to clean that, so that when it does get to you, all the fields that you need are there. And then we've been using it for self-healing administration and additional playbooks that run more specific use cases.
Right, and then lastly, like we touched on in the beginning, we use the Demisto API for literally everything from creating lists to deploying playbooks to creating jobs. And we're doing everything 200 times, so it's very important, and the Demisto API is awesome. So if you guys have any questions about that, we can definitely help you with that. So at that, we'll kind of break for questions, if anybody has any.
Yes, let's clap. That was awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello. Question I have is, you mentioned, one little thing could break everything, one little mistake. What does your guys' dev pipeline look like for Playbook and other types of asset or content changes? Like, what do you do for testing, and how do you roll it out, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so we do a lot of testing. We have entire segregated environments specific to our pipeline, so a pre-prod and a QA and a dev before it gets to dev. Our engineers and security analysts and threat hunters have access to those environments. They can mock up runbooks. They can ask for help creating actual playbooks. We walk through every single one of those playbooks with mock data in a mock tool like Mockaroo, using captured information and some synthetic information to see every outcome within that. So for those flows, every single one of them should be executed before it goes live. In the real world, that's not always 100%, but it's the best to our ability. And then the actual deployment mechanism, because we're actually on an older version of Demisto, we have our own mechanism on the back end that does that with a little bit of Git magic and some file hooks. That's changing in future versions, but we're kind of future-proofed for that and that we're ready for that. So there's definitely a pipeline that includes the multi-environments that are not prod and really hammering that out. I'd love to talk to you more about what that looks like in specifics after the talk, if that's okay?
Are you able to close an incident end-to-end using Demisto?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways that the end-to-end closure of incidents occurs within Demisto. So one, there's an escalation tree to every router, and there's an escalation tree to every sub-use case, local sub-use case. So you have two options for an analyst to go in, add additional information, and decide which flow that goes through. Either this is real and it's something that we have to do something about, or this is not real and I don't really care about it. Those two end up in a closure of that incident after it's been triaged. So that's the first option. The second option is the analysis of the contextualization from the shared services to have additional queries within Splunk, to call out to Palo Alto, to call to another completely different technology and find out, did something actually happen of this? Can I create a synthetic transaction that shows what that timeline is? And does that matter to me now? And do I need to do something about it? If the answer is yes, then I've gone from my 5% of actually detecting down to 1% of threat, and now I can use that to determine whether or not I need to close something.
Right, the other thing is, like, imagine you have like a use case where the customer just wants to know if somebody was added to the Windows administrators group. When we write that correlation rule to do that, we can pass in a flag to Demisto, say notify customer equals true. And so when the global router executes, we don't need to have an analyst look at that. We automatically go to escalation and create an alert, PagerDuty, etc. So that's another way we can do it.
Awesome, thanks guys. Are there any other questions in the audience? Okay, woohoo! Let's give these guys another round of applause.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.